I got in trouble for speeding up shell drive.
Ooh.
65.
Wow, it's impressive.
Yeah.
It is impressive.
Pontiac Phoenix in 1981.
Wow.
So got a lot of trouble for that. So I think, but up until a couple of years ago, a bunch of my other teachers were still there. Laddie Levy, who I think is
tennis
retired.
coach.
Yeah, tennis coach, English teacher. So anyhow, so what's the project? What's the purpose here today?
Yeah, so we wanted to come to New York to interview alumni like you and learn about your guys' backgrounds and then ultimately garner advice and create a little film for the graduating class.
Okay.
So we'll sort of go through your background, like walk through your experience at McDonogh before college, early career, like later in your career, and then we'll just sort of like, and sort of during that, like get cool pieces of advice or storylines or themes that could be valuable to graduating students at McDonogh.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll see what I can make up. Well, it's interesting because it's kind of a funny opportunity, and I'll use this language to say, look, maybe you guys as 18-year-olds will listen to me because I've got a whole mess of 18-year-olds that are like, oh, Dad, they don't want to hear it from me. So happy to, whatever you want. That's a very interesting senior project.
Yeah.
So
it's been really fun so far. We had our first one this morning. It went well. Mr. Ian Slater, he's in real estate, and he was great. And you're our second, so we're really excited to be here.
All right, cool. So when does the recording start?
I started it, but
Oh,
I'll cut
my
out.
God.
Sorry, actually.
Oh, no. Gotta delete the politics stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'll cut that all
Oh,
out.
please do.
Because right in the trash.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. One of the great things about McDonogh is and teachers, as you know, can tend to be more progressive, other than Bob Mahan. Right. But with the school's leadership and the board level, there's a mix of opinions. And frankly, I believe it sounds wishy-washy, like we're using language like the middle or the McDonogh way, but the answers don't sit, in my opinion, at the extremes. The answers sit actually with a statement that the school has come up with called the freedom of expression and civil discourse, and we actually had training on that. And that, to me, I got to that information late in life, but that freedom of expression and civil discourse is about collaboration, but asking questions to start discussions. So rather than saying, my opinion is XYZ, which is what exactly I just did to you before that, but to understand your perspectives, the issues you care about, to ask your opinions on something and other people's opinions so that everybody feels they're a participant, and then start to flesh out ideas. And so that's actually what's interesting for me is some of the great formative concepts for my adult life have come to me from my McDonogh experience actually as an adult. So I don't know if you have a series of questions or how you want to go through things.
We have some pre-made questions, but generally we'll just keep it like conversational. Yeah. And just dive in with what's important.
I got this, as Dave Ferrace will tell you, I got the gift of the gab. So, you'll have to edit as much as you want.
Yeah.
So, okay. So
good. So I guess we can just start with any specific memories or highlights you have from your time at McDonogh as a student.
Yeah, a lot of putting off work until the last minute. It's funny, this year they asked, and it was an honor for me to speak at the cum laude induction ceremony.
Yeah, we loved your talk.
Oh,
great.
And I was like, and I was not kidding. I was, I did well when I needed to, and I did really well in the subjects that I loved, but I wasn't so disciplined as a student at the school. But what I found was, and where you guys headed off for college. So, are you going to college?
Yeah, I'm going to UVA.
Right.
I'm going to Duke.
Okay.
I'll be at Bucknell.
All right. So those are all excellent schools. Duke and UVA are larger. Bucknell is sort of a classic liberal arts education. And what I believe you'll find, even though UVA and Duke and Bucknell are all hard to get into, you'll find your McDonogh experience was probably more rigorous and more challenging than you'll find in college. That'll give you a lot of room to breathe. And in fact, McDonogh was way harder than college for me, and I went to a quote-unquote elite college, and it allowed me the free time to start a business my freshman year. I started a computer consulting business and worked basically 60 hours a week at that, and took a lot of my classes open book exam and only showed up for the exams. Now, some of them were great in college, but overall, my McDonogh experience academically was so rigorous that I felt like I was over-prepared for college.
Wow, interesting.
And that was a huge advantage to allow me to sort of explore and think about other things besides college. McDonogh was a lot about friendships, and it was really a contrast from my experience at Gilman. So I left Gilman in 7th grade, wasn't particularly happy there. McDonogh had girls, Gilman did not, and although not very many, because it was only the second year after girls were admitted to the school. But I found a lot of intensity at the school, really enjoyed my science classes. Harley's classes were tough, and a lot of my English papers were written at the last minute, but it was just great overall academic preparation. Also at the school, though, I found there was a culture of commitment to integrity and service. There was an honor code. I think it's much deeper at the school now, because you have at McDonogh now people like Bridget Collins and the whole, not only service learning, but the thing I care about a lot, which is this Greatest Good McDonogh thing. And McDonogh really, and has also with it Life Ready, which it's hard to define Life Ready, but I think of it as not just schoolwork for you and academics, but understanding, interacting with other people, and service to the community and responsibility to the world at large. And in this day, I'm going to completely silence my stupid phone, which is telling me all kinds of stuff. So I'm gonna do not disturb until I leave. So that will no longer pester us. But in this stage of, I am losing sleep at night over the future of the American experiment. I feel like democracy is failing in this country, and political discourse has gotten violent. And to me, what's taking place at McDonogh, that's where the solution lies. It's that much innovative, and it's so creative in its thought. And it's again about collaboration, understanding others' perspectives. And if you go to the far right, that group within the United States has become hyper tribal. So it's all about fear of other and people that look different or come from different backgrounds, and that is not what this country represents. But if you go to the extreme left, it's almost hyper individualistic. So you'd say, well, speaking as a 57-year-old white male, my view of it is XYZ. And no, we are part of a community, McDonogh community, state of Maryland, the United States, and the world. And I think that language out of McDonogh has been very important. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think of other specifics. My McDonogh experience was also about friendships, and meeting, was more diverse than the community I grew up in, and I met people from different backgrounds and became friends with people from different backgrounds, and that was great too. Mm-hmm. So I actually, maybe perhaps because it's more recent, I've drawn a lot more intellectually from my experience within the McDonogh community that you guys live in. Because the school's faculty and staff is really pretty innovative. They're really willing, the school has done things like, what about AP courses, which have been dropped largely in New York? And AP courses, which used to be distinctive and academically rigorous, are so widespread and so well defined that it doesn't give the teachers a lot of room to have you other than prep for the test. Mm-hmm. And McDonogh's willing to rethink things. And again, with McDonogh, you guys now have had 4 years. Merritt Livermore thought through a new approach to scheduling, which was a couple of things. At different ages, brains function differently. And these 45-minute classes where you have a transition every 45 minutes, it doesn't work well for learning. And she was part of a task group, I believe, created a course schedule so that you guys wouldn't have 5 or 6 sets of homework due 5 days a week. And also that you would have these long blocks so that you could collaborate and go into topics more readily. And to me, McDonogh is just a wonderful institution. I only wish my kids had been able to go there. So, so I'm going to pause and give you guys room to ask questions. So
That's
does that
super
cover
cool.
the McDonogh stuff?
Yeah, that does.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention one other thing. One of the things, and it's notable, there were a couple of teachers that were major influencers, and I liked a lot of the teachers, but back in my day, which is, 45 years ago when I started at McDonogh, there weren't computers at the school. There was one sort of punch card mini computer. I think it was a DEC. You wouldn't know what DEC is, Digital Equipment Corporation. But I worked heavily in computer programming with Mina Wender. And I was one of the first kids. I was really into computers and still am in a lot of ways. And of course that led to my passion for technology. You heard me mouth off about that at the cum laude ceremony. So, and in college, because McDonogh was so easy, McDonogh was so rigorous, and college was easy, I started working full-time at the beginning of my freshman year.
So you discussed that. It's super interesting. I think that's a really unique storyline, I think.
Yeah.
So discuss that.
Well, computers were a thing. There were Apple computers and then TRS-80 computers back in that day, and IBM came out with its first personal computer. They didn't even know how to market it. And, IBM's big business was big mainframe computers and then typewriters, believe it or not. You guys probably know what a typewriter is. You've seen one, but you've never used one. And I just found them fascinating. And at that age, people were like, hey, let me pay an 18-year-old to help us set up computers because young kids know this stuff better than the grown-ups do. And so I started working full-time first I was a technician at Computerland in Philadelphia, and I was installing memory chips and all that stuff. And then the customers wanted me to help set up their computers. So I went from $3.75 an hour, which I was thrilled to get, to someone saying to me, well, how much do you want to charge? I was like, $7.50 an hour? And he's like, great. And then so I was like, woo, I was like, doubled my salary. And by the end of my freshman year, I was at $40 an hour, that was a lot of coin for a college kid at that point in time. But I basically ran a consulting company that became a bigger business by the end of my college career. And I ran that for a couple years, and it's interesting. It was successful and unsuccessful. The salesman kind of got away from me. I hired a bunch of people, and some of the people worked out really well, and some people, the salesmen were selling me bills of goods about how much business they were going to generate. And when I decided to close the business, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I became an analyst covering the technology space for Alex Brown.
Oh, really?
So I went to work for Alex Brown in New York. That it's now part of Deutsche Bank, but I still think Alex Brown is an old Baltimore.
Yeah, my dad works for Brown Advisory. Do you know Ben Griswold?
Oh, sure.
That's my grandfather.
This is killing me. Oh, my great-grandfather. No, yeah, Ben, he and I were at Alex. He might know my name.
Okay.
He was pretty senior at Alex Brown when I was there.
Okay.
I was only at Alex Brown for a year, and I went to work on Wall Street, not to be a Wall Street person, but basically to go figure out what company I would go work for.
Got it.
Within the computer space. And that's kind of, it's counsel I provide to people when they say, what do I do? And the answer is, if you don't know what you want to do, and frankly there are jobs out there that you guys haven't even figured out yet, and or that maybe don't exist. I picked the Alex Brown work as a way to sort of if you don't know where in the forest you want to be, go be a fire warden and go up in a watchtower and see if you can see all kinds of things. So like the consulting industry, if you're doing consulting for lots of different types of companies, you can figure out where you want to work. And I also like education in general that's experiential. So if you can work while you're in school, it'll give you a taste for what the real world is. Because school has nothing to do with actual day-to-day work.
Right.
But so I went to work for Alex Brown and discovered actually I liked being an analyst. And then a firm in the Midwest, Piper Jaffray, recruited me. And I went out there, and that was a way to go to a place, you know, I've been successful, but this is, you know, you could say, I was born on third base, right? And I know I didn't hit a triple. That's the best sports analogy you'll get from me, which is McDonogh is an elite education from K through 12, and Calvert is as well. And so you're already entering life with a great advantage. Then you're off to terrific schools, as most McDonogh grads are off to, and that puts you in a terrific position. So all I did was leverage a lot of advantages that I'd already had. But when I went to the Midwest, I wanted to end up in Wall Street in a place where no one had heard of my last name or knew who my family was or anything like that. And I really liked it out there, except for April and November, because those months are full-on winter in Minnesota, and that drove me bananas. But I liked being on Wall Street, and spent 7 winters in Minneapolis, which is the equivalent of 15 years. Still have some great friends there. And around the end of '97, I said, you know, what I find is Wall Street is filled with specialists, and these specialists are supposedly analyzing companies in the real world, and they're buying and selling them, or they're evaluating them. And generally what I find is people on Wall Street don't actually know what's going on in the real world. And it was because I had run my own business and knew what sales was like and technology was like, and yet people on Wall Street were analyzing it. It was that split of difference where I was successful because I kind of knew in the real world what was going on, and people would, you know, Wall Street tends to say, well, if the pattern is A, B, C, D, Wall Street's going to just extrapolate E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Still know my alphabet. But in any event, Wall Street doesn't get the real world. And you can actually really drive a truck between that gap. And I decided to launch my own funds. And because Wall Street is too focused on the short term stocks and the market and equities, the market overreacts to short-term news and kind of underplays the significance of long-term trends. And that, there's a philosophy of discipline of thinking of predicting the future, which sounds weird. You can't predict the future. I can say there are lots of things I can't predict, but there are certain things you absolutely can. And those 3 things, actually it's kind of on our website, but one is demographics. And demographics is the study of population shifts and changes and the specifics within populations. So we can get a pretty good idea of how many 40-year-olds there are going to be, or 38-year-olds in your case, there will be in 20 years by counting up the number of graduating seniors and subtracting a few for Darwinian stupid things, right? But there, if there's 600 million 18-year-olds globally right now, there's going to be some number less than 600 million 18-year-olds in 20 years, 38-year-olds in 20 years. Demographics is also more about the movement and shifts of population, like sadly for your parents, you guys as a group are less likely to have children than our age group is, for all kinds of interesting reasons. So demographics, you can predict the future in a certain way. And Wall Street doesn't think about those things. And it makes me ask questions about the demand for housing when, right off the top of my head, I can tell you that American fertility has been on a steady march downward, which means women are having about 1.6 children over their lifetimes, and population replacement is 2.2. That is and that, by the way, that's true across not only all Western nations, but it's true in China. It's like 1.01 or 1.05, and even fertility in Africa is collapsing, which is, and I struggle with the question of, is growth good? I'm not sure growth at all costs is good, particularly for the planet. So that's demographics. The next thing that I think about a lot is resource availability. Broadly, is there enough oil to power cars? Well, oil is one resource, but clean air is another. Are we, with carbon dioxide increasing in the atmosphere, what does that mean? Because it creates a blanket effect and it holds energy in the environment. Global warming isn't quite the right thing, but if you remember enough, you probably had a different Bob Smoot teach you chemistry.
Yeah.
You had Bob Smoot Jr., but
Yeah.
right, and I had the senior. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. He was tough, But nonetheless, if you understand the basics of chemistry, you understand that carbon dioxide creates a kind of a blanket and prevents heat from escaping, and that increased heat creates increased volatility. Right, catalyzes reactions. Climate is a resource. Oil is a resource. A doctor's time is a resource. So resource availability. What do we do for enough food and energy? And interestingly, it's led me to think about food and say, we actually don't have energy or food shortages at all. There's so much waste in the food ecosystem from farm to table that we could overfeed everybody with higher quality food if it didn't spoil or wasn't transported the wrong way or things like that. If we didn't waste heat energy, it's around. It's about location, where, when, and preservation. So demographics, resource availability, and then one other thing I care about a lot is innovation. And what cool new ideas are going to reshape the way we make and consume goods and services, from medicine to food to shelter, what have you. So that's big picture thinking about things.
Got it. So it sounds like you sort of, to get to this level of your life, you've used real world experiences, knowledge of the real world, versus maybe Wall Street as an example, like trying to predict too much short term, like overvaluing the short term. So your time at in Philadelphia doing the computer thing really set you up for.
Yeah, it was real world experience, and then the contrast with Wall Street was interesting. And the other thing is, I'd have to say there's one major thing. There was a set of courses at Penn that I took called the History and Sociology of Science, and it was not science or technology or anything like that. It was why the light bulb became a successful commercial product in the context, so it was Edison's invention, quote unquote, but I'd call it more of a development, in the context of society and the economy and the culture of the day. And so that led me to a kind of way of looking at the world which is intersectional. And I'm very skeptical of specialists. And it's something where, doctors, if you ask a doctor a question because you've got a stomach ache and you ask a gastroenterologist who's basically a digestive system specialist, they're going to give you one answer, and a infectious disease doctor may give you a completely different answer, and then a general practitioner will give you another answer, And a lot of times the answers for things don't come from within the area of specialty. And I'd argue that an awful lot of innovation and creativity and great new ideas are going to be coming from intersections. So not biology, but the intersection of biology and computing, which might be things you might not think about. One of the most important changes in understanding of the pandemic didn't come from an epidemiologist or a virologist or an immunologist at all. During the first part of the pandemic, there were shortages of masks, but it was believed that aerosol transmission of the virus didn't happen. They thought it was particles, so it's actual straight boogers rather than just air that you breathe, right? And it took this is a specialty that you wouldn't know, an aerosol physicist, Dr. Lindsay Marr, to debunk an understanding of viral transmission that was embedded in all of epidemiology since the 1950s, to say, you guys are idiots. You've got this completely wrong, and you're killing people, and this virus is transmitted via aerosol, which means just breathing in a room means you can get it across a restaurant. We all know that to be the case now. So this physicist, Lindsay Marr, one of the Virginia schools, was laughed off the stage. She wasn't even welcome in the room of epidemiologists because she wasn't an epidemiologist. But epidemiology had an embedded understanding of aerosol transmission that came from a mistake in the 1950s, which is that tuberculosis was or was not, I forget, transmitted via aerosols. And so they said the size of the tuberculosis virus was the size. So anything bigger than that couldn't be transmitted through the air and float in the air. And that was a mistake. It was just an embedded mistake that all epidemiologists were trained on and I don't have the number, I don't forget, it's 5 nanometers or 11 nanometers, but you get the idea. It goes to something else. So first of all, intersectional thinking is incredibly important, which is why I have much more respect for a liberal arts education than I used to. Because look, my undergrad degree was in business school, right? It was decision science, finance, and marketing. And understanding a little bit about a lot of things is really, really important and will serve you well. And then again, that's kind of McDonogh is starting to think about those things, intersectional thinking and things like that. The other thing is the older I get, the less sure, I'm more overwhelmed by how much I don't know and can't know. And so you guys are amassing huge amounts of knowledge at your age, and you're learning both different subject areas and different disciplines. So you'll learn a lot about what you don't know over the next chunk of your life. Learning what you can't know is important because an awful lot of life is what's unknowable. So that has been an important subject area for me of late. And then finally, so what I know, not that much. I wasn't that great a student, right? What I don't know, big number, a lot of information. So I know, but frankly now with Google, I know where to get it or I can talk to experts. What's unknowable is a little bit more vague because there's a psychological premise that when something happens and you look at someone that predicted it, you give them credit for having predicted it, and it might have been a lucky prediction. Then the other thing that's really interesting is human behavior and how humans are terrible decision makers, and they can be manipulated into coming to conclusions that aren't science and evidence based, because we tend as a group, as humans, as a species, overweight fear. We wouldn't be here if we heard a noise in the forest and we jumped. If it were just a bunny rabbit, you just jumped, right? But if it were a tiger and you jumped, you saved yourself. So we tend to overreact to fear, and we're seeing that, by the way, in our discourse, right? Facebook story that tells you to be afraid of people that are different from you is going to get a lot more traction than a Facebook story that says, hey, these two people that were different came to a great solution. Isn't that happy? But humans are systematically bad decision makers, and understanding how you make decisions, often poorly, but predictably badly, and how other people make decisions is useful to me. So that's my blather. What else do you have to ask about?
I was going to ask, I like you mentioned like the friendships you made and the connections you've had from McDonogh. And obviously I think to some degree what I've gathered from you is that it's not about what you know, it's about who you know in business. And I was just going to ask, is there like a specific moment or a connection you've made that you've really found valuable through like the McDonogh community in business or elsewhere?
Well, I mean, my oldest and closest friend, one of my oldest and closest friends, was a classmate of mine at McDonogh. And, you know, this is what I observe about friendships. Friendships are not about people who back you up all the time. Friendships are about people who are willing to tell you when you're being an idiot, which I get a lot. So, and that's part of it. But I've made a lot of friends also, frankly, on the board at McDonogh, including with people that I disagree with. So I personally would be inclined to disagree with, or have an instinct to disagree with. I was like learning new stuff, and so it's people that are different from me that I learn new things from. And frankly, there's been, you know, our country's gone through a lot of struggles, and I'd say as someone, part of, this is a charged word, but part of the privilege of being a white guy is I have had fewer encounters with the police that have been problematic, and so sometimes the absence of something negative is a privilege. And because McDonogh is a more diverse community than what I grew up with in my family, I got to learn from my friends who have had very different experiences, what their experiences were like. And it gave me a great deal of appreciation for you know, the challenges this country's facing, I think, are more visible now because we have cell phones that can record what's going on. I mean, obviously, if you ask someone that's of color what they've experienced, it's been going on forever. It's just we get to see it in, you know, real-time video. So, you know, my friendships, particularly with people who are different from me, have been really helpful and fun.
Got it. That's great.
Then I got to do a greatest good McDonogh pitch, which is,
Yeah.
you know, not so much greatest good McDonogh, but the other thing is I've always done service stuff, but the secret is not, because it's like, yeah, you know, I have to go do it, and you know, it's kind of part of my, you know, push-ups or working out or what have you. It turns out that stuff is really, it's fun. What's interesting that I've learned in the last 10 years is that doing good in the world is not necessarily in conflict with making profit for yourself. And again, my work at McDonogh, at the school, the way they've been very innovative about thinking about a lot of things, a lot of those things are applicable in my work life. But I think you guys heard me sort of give that rah-rah pitch for the school then. So, what else?
So, do you think that kind of drive towards service and philanthropy was something that was started at McDonogh, or that you kind of developed later on?
It was more from my family, I'd have to say. It was a really big part of my family's culture, particularly my grandparents, because I grew up, you know, I had people that I referred to as aunt and uncle that I didn't realize weren't related to me, who were actually just, my father would call them his foster brothers and sisters. They just came and lived with our family because, and it's like people hosting Ukrainian refugees at the moment. We just brought them in and brought them over. So there was some of that. Service was part of McDonogh, in our era, but it's much more explicitly a part of the school now. So, and that's kind of my hope is, I think a lot of civic engagement in the U.S. Historically has come from either, from religious affiliation, church, synagogue, mosque, serving the community there. And America's religious connection is on the decline, as it is in most Western or developing nations. And so it needs to come from a more secular place, which is what's happening at McDonogh. So, the answer is a mix of family and the school. I'd have to say more of the family.
Got it. So you've been philanthropic with, I think your point's really valuable because a lot of people would think that going out and making a ton of money is actually sort of selfish, but in reality, you've been able to give back and fund even bigger projects that are more valuable than just.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are some, I won't name the names, but there are some members of the McDonogh board who, in my opinion, they're such innovative and creative thinkers. They're giving away too much of their income right now because the ideas that they have the opportunity to invest in could be worth 50 or 100 times. So, doing well for yourself allows either the time or the capital to do well for other people.
That's a really cool point.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, and it's a little bit of a wrestle because I also some of my success I do spend on my family and personal well-being and enjoyment,